Hello, this is Mr. Ferreira, and I'm going to be talking through you through a set of slides on conformity to social roles, with the key study being the Stanford Prison Experiment. Now, before I start, I'd just like to point out to you that the original study is published by Haney as the key author, and Zimbardo is just the second author on this in 1971, and this can be found in your textbook. Now, there's also a lot of this information has come from the website, which is important for you to have a look at. It's been updated for the latest content, but you can read through this, and I did expect you to look through this over the summer as part of your summer task. So, conformity to social roles. What I'm focusing on is the key components of the study that you can use in terms of an exam. We don't often get asked about the procedure in an exam. Occasionally, and I'm going to reinforce this, we do get that you could get asked how conformity to social roles has been investigated. And so a couple of things that you can say about the procedure. So first of all, we need to make it really clear that Zimbardo set up a mock prison, or Haney and Banks and Zimbardo set up a mock prison in the basement of the Stanford Prison Experiment. And here's a short clip that demonstrates just that.
Yeah. This is where it all happened in the summer of 1971. Right down this corridor in the basement of the psychology department is where we converted these offices and storage rooms to prison cells. And we had students like yourself, college students from all over the country, play the roles of either prisoners or guards. This was the yard, the prison yard. Here in this closet was solitary confinement, the infamous hole where the guards put prisoners for punishment.
So that extract comes from the Quiet Rage DVD, which kind of shows kind of the making of the particular prison. You can see it's quite basic, but it is still kind of a prison, so there's nothing too dramatic about that. Moving on, we do see that they placed an advert in a local newspaper in which they asked for participants, and they did select participants that they wanted to be emotionally stable. And you'll see later how this becomes really important, that they have participants that the effects of the prison is what happens to them rather than any external problems. Now you can see from the next slide actually how small the particular advert would have been, and therefore quite interesting that they got quite a few participants to come forward. We also know, and then this is another key point here, is that the participants were randomly assigned. The importance of this is that we want to make sure that there's not any experimenter effects. So there's the experimenter there, and we see that if he, for example, chose to choose participants that he thought was strong or powerful as prison guards, this could influence the outcome. Or if he thought that prisoners needed to be kind of weak or submissive, it would be a problem. So he did randomly assign, or the team did randomly assign, the roles of prison guards and prisoners. We also know that the prisoners were arrested at home, and Zimbardo says in order to heighten realism, they were arrested at home. Now there could be an issue with this deception here, but we do kind of know from the videos that this was perhaps more of a curiosity than anything else. But you could argue it's one of the things that was different to the BBC prison study, is that they were arrested at home. We also find that the prisoners were taken into a situation where they're blindfolded. Now that's perhaps something which is not typically happens in a prison, but in order to kind of get them to the prison and to keep the realism up, they're blindfolded. But the rest of it being strip searched, deloused, and issued with their uniform are not too much of an issue, because it kind of happens everywhere. And we can see from this particular slide that the uniform was really basic with a number on it. It was referred to as a woman's smock, a shapeless kind of dress, in order to kind of separate them from everyone else. We also know that symbolically they had a chain around their ankles and they wore a stocking over their heads as if their heads were shaved. And we know that the particular study was meant to take place for a period of 2 weeks. We also know some element of differences that you could find that the prison guards had. We see that they did have a set of rules. Now, what has potentially emerged subsequent to this particular study over the last few years is that Zimbardo and his team may have played a more active role in guiding these particular prisoners to act in a particular way. But we also can see that what's important here is that there's interaction between the guards and the prisoners. So enforcing rules such as what time they eat, or kind of waking them up to do exercise, or writing letters home and things like that, it kind of adds to the realism of the prison. Now I'm going to show you another short video again to kind of demonstrate this interaction.
Everybody out! All right, come on. Well, gentlemen, here it is, time for count.
At 2:30 a.m., the prisoners were rudely awakened from their sleep by the night guard shift for their count. The guards were told to routinely perform counts to familiarize the prisoners with their numbers and determine that they were all present and accounted for. But more important, it provided a regular occasion for the guards to interact with and exercise control over the prisoners. There were several counts every day and night.
Okay, so the quality of the film isn't particularly good, but we do kind of see that that interaction was happening, that the prisoners' kind of daily routines were kind of interrupted. Another thing that's quite specific about the guards is that they were given a specific set of uniform, the mirror sunglasses, the nightstick, the actual khaki uniform becomes quite important to the role that they particularly play. Finally, we also know the difference between the guards and the prisoners. The prisoners remained there the entire time, as it would be a prison-like situation, and the guards worked shifts. They were able to kind of leave and go according to the time frame. This may well be important when we see later that things kind of changed, where guards potentially didn't work their shift and came back and kind of helped the prison guards establish kind of the set of rules. Now that's the procedure. Now, obviously for us, it's kind of a decision on what are the important aspects of that we need to kind of explain to the examiner in terms of kind of the mock prison, in terms of the random assignment, the emotionally stable, kind of the dress uniform that the guards and prisoners had. Those are the key features of this particular study that you should talk about. Now, just kind of sidestepping just a little bit, we could ask a general question. So Zimbardo has set up with his team, or the team have set up an experiment that kind of should run smoothly without any problems at all. So what could go wrong? Now, I'm going to leave the film trailer for you to watch separately. I've shown it to you in other videos, so therefore it's not that important for us to watch it again. But the second video, I'm going to talk you through this because Zimbardo here is going through several different roles. So the first one, looking at kind of how the guards were surprised potentially to take the role they're in. And we also see a very important situation where we see an interaction between a prisoner and a guard. And then finally, kind of the emotional breakdown that potentially happens to some of the prisoners. So let's have a look at this.
Most of the evil in the world comes about not out of evil motives, but somebody saying, hey, you know, get with the program, be a team player. When a person feels, I am not personally responsible, I am not accountable, it's the role I'm playing, or these are the orders I've gotten, then you allow yourself to do things you would never do under ordinary circumstances.
I began to feel that I was losing my identity, that the person that I call Clay, the person who put me in this place, the person who volunteered to go into this prison, because it was a prison to me, it still is a prison to me. I don't look on it as an experiment or a simulation. It was just a prison that was run by psychologists instead of run by the state.
I had really thought that I was incapable of this kind of behavior. I was surprised, even no, I was dismayed to find out that I could really be that I could act in a manner so absolutely unaccustomed to anything I would even really dream of doing. And and while I was doing it, I didn't feel any regret. I didn't feel any guilt. It was only afterwards, when I began to reflect on what I had done, that this behavior began to dawn on me, and I realized that this was a part of me I hadn't really noticed before.
I feel so up inside. I feel really up inside. You don't know. I gotta go. To a doctor, anything. I can't say that. I'm up. I don't know how to explain it. I'm all up inside. Out! Now! God damn it. I'm up. You don't know. I mean, God. I mean, Jesus Christ, I'm burning up inside. Don't you know? I just can't take it.
The scene you just saw was at the end of only 36 hours into this study. Each day after that, another prisoner had a similar reaction. And so at the end of 5 days, we had 5 kids we chose because they were normal and healthy, having emotional breakdowns.
You put a uniform on and are given a role, I mean, a job, saying your job is to keep these people in line, then you're certainly not the same person as if you're in street clothes and in a different role. You really become that person once you put on that khaki uniform, you put on the glasses, you take the nightstick, and you act the part. That's your costume, and you have to act accordingly when you put it on.
It harms me.
Why?
I mean harms. I mean in the present tense, it harms me.
How did it harm you? How does it harm you?
I find this body language quite important here. We see 2 men that started the study kind of equal, and yet kind of we see the person who played the prison guard kind of being a lot more forceful, a lot more kind of positive in his body language.
Just to think about it, you mean that people can be like that?
Yeah. It let me in on some knowledge that I've never experienced firsthand. I've read about it. I've read a lot about it. But I've never experienced it firsthand. I've never seen someone turn that way. And I know you're a nice guy. You know?
You
You understand? I do. I do know you're a nice guy.
Then why,
I don't
do you hate
get
me?
that because I know what you can turn into.
It surprised me that no one said anything to stop me. No one said, Carmen, you can't say those things to me. Those things are sick. Nobody said that. They just accepted what I said. I said, go tell that man to the face he's the scum of the earth, and they'd do it without question. They'd do push-ups without question. They'd sit in the hole. They'd abuse each other. And here they're supposed to have they're supposed to be together as a unit in jail, but here they're abusing each other because I requested them to, and no one questioned my authority at all. And it really shocked me. Why didn't people, when I started to get abuse people so much, I started to get so profane that, and still people didn't say anything.
Prisoner 819 did a bad thing. Prisoner 819 did a bad thing. Prisoner 819 did a bad thing. Prisoner 819 did a bad thing.
As soon as I realized that 819 could hear this, I rushed to the room where I had left him. And what I found was a boy crying hysterically, while in the background his fellow prisoners were chanting and yelling that he is a bad prisoner and that they were being punished because of him.
Because of what prisoner 819 did, my cell is a mess. Because of what prisoner 819 did, my cell is a mess.
Well, I'm trying to comfort this young man, and he says, I have to go back. And I said, what do you mean? I have to prove to them I'm not a bad prisoner. And at this point he said, no, you're not a bad prisoner. You're Stu, and I'm not the superintendent. I'm Phil Zimbardo. The study is over. And he kept saying, no, I have to go back. I'm not a bad prisoner. And so the reality of that prison was so deep that even when I'm giving him the opportunity to leave, his reputation, his image as a bad prisoner has to be undone, has to be reconciled. When we released the first prisoner, 8612, we brought in a substitute, but he came in halfway through. And what's interesting is, day by day, as the situation degraded, we all adjusted to it. That is, each day's level of violence, of abuse, was a platform for the next day. But he comes in now and he's seeing these crazy things going on. He says right up front, I'm not having any of this. And they told him, you can't leave. They won't let you leave, which we never said. In fact, 8612 was the one who told him they won't let you out. And so he says, I'm going to go on a hunger strike. I'm not going to eat anything. I'll get sick and they'll have to let me go. And he's a skinny kid to begin with. And the guards go crazy because he's now the symbol of resistance. All the other kids are broken. If they're not having emotional breakdowns, they're like zombies. They're doing whatever the guard said. And for the next 2 days, every guard on every shift, their mission is get this prisoner to eat those damn sausages. They put him in solitary confinement. They make him hold the sausages. And to his credit, he resists. So he should have been the hero. He should have been the hero for the other prisoners. Instead, he becomes a troublemaker. The guards set the other prisoners against him. They said, if he doesn't eat the sausages, you don't get your visiting hours. If he doesn't eat the sausages, you guys don't get your blankets. If he doesn't eat the sausages, we're going to put your blankets in nettles and spurs, and you're going to spend hours digging them out. So they start jumping all over him. Eat the damn sausages. You know, you're ruining our life.
So very interesting video there, kind of Zimbardo talking through several aspects of the particular study that are worth noting. So what do we need to take from this? Okay, so there's several findings that we looked at. So we can say several things like this, that the guards took up the roles with enthusiasm. Okay, that's quite important there. But of course, the purpose of this is that they become a threat, and it's because of the threat that we have to stop the study after 6 days. We also know that it was the prisoners who rebelled first, okay, which is probably stereotypical. We'd expect that they've had their freedoms taken away from them, but it's actually the guards' retaliation that ends up being quite important, and their decision to use this divide and rule kind of tactic. And in lesson, obviously, expressed how this is very similar to kind of how colonialism works in terms of oppressing people that kind of potentially could rise up against you. We also know that after a few days, having had their rebellion kind of quashed, the prisoners become submissive, and once again, it's their submission to that role that becomes important. And we also see that the role of the prisoners, we see that they start enjoying their power, and of course that increases their aggression. We also can say quite clearly, or finally, kind of say that that 3 prisoners were released, and because of the distress that they were seeing. So if you ever get asked about the findings, please kind of refer to kind of these bullet points and ensure that you're clearly able to explain them. So we do talk about the Stanford Prison being conformity to social roles, really quite important. But I also mentioned in class this whole idea of situational influence. This becomes quite important because we still have this idea that it's a person's disposition. It's kind of bad things are done by bad people. But Zimbardo, and also we're going to see in the next kind of series, that Milgram kind of starts saying that people don't behave in these particular ways unless they put themselves in a situation which kind of forces them to do this. The guards wouldn't have become oppressive if there weren't guards in that particular context. So this is important. So it says that guards, prisoners, researchers, everyone conforms to their roles, and that they start behaving in a particular way that confirms that particular role. And I use the example here of the prison chaplain, somebody who could just be there kind of as a token, kind of supportive role, starts talking to them about their rights and starts giving them advice and kind of how they can kind of free themselves from these prisons, which is clearly kind of, it's just a study. There's no real prison. They need to kind of think about this. Now we have several evaluation points, and I do start with something that's quite important here. We need to recognize that the Stanford Prison study was actually kind of planned very well, and we could also say that the variables were controlled. Therefore, it says we have internal validity, does what it's supposed to do. Now, the things, of course, that they controlled were things like, as I said previously, emotionally stable participants were selected. So you could say the variable of kind of external, internal, in terms of what happens outside the prison, what happens inside the prison. Outside the prison, they were fine. There was nothing kind of going on in these people's lives to expect them to behave in a particular way. We also know the randomly assigning aspect of it. There's no experimenter bias here in terms of choosing a particular type of person that may actually be kind of more cruel or threatening. In fact, it was quite interesting that as the experiment progressed, the prisoners did say, but you chose people to be particularly powerful and strong to be prison guards. But of course, we know that they didn't. So having this control is a strength to the experiment because, as I said, increases the internal validity of the study. So we can then say that the conclusions were actually as a result of the study and not because of something outside of the study. So that's a very kind of strong and positive point. However, we do have a fundamental weakness. Because it wasn't a real prison, it was a mock prison, we can say quite literally it lacked realism, and we see Banuzzi and Mahavedi basically saying that means that it doesn't feel real, so you could just act your role. Now, we all like to kind of act kind of certain roles, certainly, and it could be dependent on your circumstances, but this does seem realistic. That if you're playing a role, you might have demand characteristics. You might, as a prisoner, start thinking, well, what is it they want me to do? And you act in that particular way. Or most importantly, you could argue the prison guards were thinking, hang on, I'm meant to behave in a particular way. And we see an example here is the John Wayne character, the Carmen guy who said, I pushed and nobody pushed back. Kind of this expectations that you put on that uniform and you act in a particular way. So this is a genuine criticism of the study. Is this true? Can we actually say that these participants didn't behave in that way? We do have a comeback though, and this is from Zimbardo himself, who collected data and says that 90% of the conversations were about the prison. So the context here becomes really important. You don't, if it wasn't a real prison, they'll be talking about their lives, about their girlfriends, about their studies, but they seem to be focused on the prison. So it felt like a prison. We saw from that video that guy said it's still a prison to him. I also mentioned this use of the word however. Please try and make sure you only use this in evaluation because it is a key word to us. Moving on to the final evaluation point, and this is possibly the biggest evaluation point, is the ethics of this particular study. And we say that it was conducted in an unethical way. Now, of course, the reminder at this particular point is that Zimbardo and the team did not intend for it to be unethical. And therefore, I kind of start with a statement, and this appears to be true, that it was approved. Any major study like this has to be approved by an ethical committee, and this particular study would have done that. We also know that they were not openly deceived. They were told kind of what would happen if they were prisoners. Yes, they were deceived in terms of if they ended up about being arrested at home, but we know that Zimbardo was quite open about exactly what they meant to do. But we see from here that there's a real problem with Zimbardo playing the dual role. Now, clearly the ethics committee maybe didn't kind of foresee this. Maybe if we were having a comeback, a counter to the control issue, saying that yes, it was incredibly controlled, but he didn't think of this. He didn't think of the conflict that this might pose, because Zimbardo played the superintendent and the lead researcher. So we see that as a lead researcher, he should have been looking after his participants, and he admits himself that it clouded his judgment, that he potentially kind of should have stopped the study earlier, and ultimately it results in psychological harm of the participants. And this is the problem. Now, so we have 3 points there. I would recommend you read the textbook, make sure that we are able to kind of express these as clear criticisms of conformity to social roles. And there we go. The last thing, of course, is once again, there's always a Mind Changes episode, and definitely worth, if you've got 30 minutes on your hands, to kind of listen to that particular podcast to kind of see if you can get any information. Lastly, speaking, of course, there's a few questions that have been asked. Of course, this could be a kind of extended writing activity, but we also need to focus on short questions, only 4 marks. Now, having set this question before, we find that the biggest problem is it says outline the procedures and it says and findings. So what some participants do, they spend too much time talking about the procedures and they don't really focus on the findings. This is something you could almost divide into 2 marks procedures, 2 marks findings. Make sure you answer it, make sure you're precise, make sure you focus on what's important. And then, of course, the second 4 marks actually says discuss 2 criticisms. So the idea of discuss, we could perhaps have a couple of howevers there. We could use a peak format, but what we really need to do is to kind of talk about what these criticisms are. And obviously with 2 criticisms, I'd probably once again aim for about 2 marks, 2 marks. You can't get full marks unless you have 2, and so therefore kind of make sure that you do that. Now, I really have hoped that you've enjoyed this particular video. Sorry if there was any noise in the background. Can't control kind of what other people are doing in the house. We're going to be moving on to Milgram next, which should be really exciting, and I hope that you have a pleasant evening tonight.